On this episode of Iron Summit, we get into the really interesting topic of peptide therapeutics. Ryan and I have gotten a lot of questions about these over the last few months, so we decided to bring on one of the nation's leading experts, Anthony Castore. Before we get into this episode, we just wanted to be clear that this episode is in no way an endorsement for anyone to do peptides. And in fact, this podcast is for informational and educational purposes only and does not substitute professional medical advice or consultation with healthcare professionals in any way. With that being said, this is definitely a really cool episode. We're excited to share some of Anthony's knowledge, and let's get into it. Welcome to Iron Summit, where we cover topics about health, fitness, and general performance through the eyes of former elite Division I wrestlers. Today, we have a super interesting guest. We have Anthony Castore, who is one of the world's leading voices on really any kind of advanced supplementation or peptide therapeutics for injury prevention, recovery, athletic performance, neural adaptation, you name it. Anthony's the guy. I tore my pec. I was interested in doing some peptide therapy to speed up healing processes. I was referred to Anthony by two separate people who didn't know each other. So I think that it'll tell you a little bit about who Anthony is. So to turn it over to you, Anthony, you are known as, and even says on your website, the king of peptides. How'd you get that? How'd you get that crown?
So it's kind of a funny story. I've been into researching peptides since like the 90s. That's going to date me. My birth certificate was actually etched in stone. But back in the 90s, I had delusions that I might be able to do something in bodybuilding. And I don't know if you guys have competed in bodybuilding or been to a show, but there is nothing that smells worse than that protein. And I was doing some research and I came across the melanotin peptide and found out, you take this for 10 days and you get a great tan and it's got some benefits for sleep and fat burning. And I was hooked right away. I was like, man, this is really incredible. And then in the 90s, also, you'll remember that's kind of when IGF was starting to come on the bodybuilding scene. So I was like, was not blessed with good genetics. And I was like, best chance I have of doing anything or helping people I was coaching was kind of learning about the supplementation side of it. So since the 90s, kind of been researching all this stuff and just trying to keep up with the research and got a pretty adventurous spirit. So tried a lot of these out and coached a lot of people and just something I enjoy learning about.
Yep. And so now you're just regarded. I mean, I know. So one of the people that recommended you to me was my doctor, who had heard you speak at a conference. So we have, there are medical professionals who turn to you for advice on this kind of thing. I mean, it's kind of a classic tale of practical knowledge leading the way on the scientific knowledge side of things.
It's a funny story, I always enjoyed science and math, and I'm mildly dyslexic, and I got a really weak stomach. So my parents are like, you got to go into med school, like totally knock it out of the park. And I was like, I just don't have the stomach for it. And with mild dyslexia, like reading for long amounts of time is difficult, but I learn really well through conversation. So um, kind of my journey, my learning, I did right from the beginning. I would always kind of find the smartest people I could. Just I'm a guy that loves to ask questions. So I just ask a lot of questions and um, do the research, read, and kind of piece together my own education. And just really blessed to have the opportunities to educate and speak at different conferences and um, be in the position I'm in that people ask what I do, and I tell them, it's kind of an interesting space. My background's in strength training, but I consider myself an educator. I work with, as you mentioned, I work with doctors, I work with chiropractors, strength coaches, athletes, uh, broad range of people with all sorts of different goals, even just people that want to sharper brain, add a couple years to their life, and I love it. Get to talk to people and nerd out on this stuff all day. So what could be better?
That's awesome. Anthony, this is like amazing. I got so many questions for you, but I think most people, it's like peptides are such a like hot topic right now. Can you give us
Yeah.
like in layman's terms, what's a peptide? How do they function? How is that different from proteins, different things that we're talking about? Because it's a word we get thrown around a lot, but I've never heard anybody define it in a big way. And love for you to kind of define that for our audience.
Yeah. So I should warn you guys, I use a lot of analogies to explain things. I think that it resonates better with people. And as I'm learning too, that's something that's really helped when I kind of make associations and analogies. So when we think about like a peptide, a really good way to think about them is they're basically just these short chains of amino acids. And good way to describe amino acids is they're like Lego bricks. And peptides are just kind of short sequences of these Lego bricks that are made by like you would snap them together just like you would a Lego, but we call those peptide bonds. And typically with a peptide, there's going to be like 2 to 50 amino acids. And if it's between 2 and 4, we call those bioregulator peptides. And 4 up to 50, although I believe they've scaled it back to 45 now for the official definition, would be considered a peptide. And then when we think about something like longer string of peptides, like polypeptides, so like growth hormones, 191 amino acids. So basically, depending on the size, the length of the chain of Legos or peptide bonds, that determines whether it's going to be a peptide or a protein or a polypeptide. And um, lot of similarities are they're all made of amino acids, but yeah, just different size molecules.
Got it. And so when someone takes a peptide, does it depend on the peptide what it's doing in your body, or how does it work? How does it tell your body what to
Yeah,
do?
so exactly. The a good way to think of a peptide, it's just like a messenger in the body, and what they do is they help cells communicate with each other. Like insulin, for instance, is a peptide that would regulate your blood sugar levels, and they're these signaling molecules. When we think about things like whether it's releasing insulin or whether it's um, how our mitochondria is working or modulating neurotransmitters in the brain to help us sleep or think better. Peptides are just basically uh, creating these signals, and the regulation can vary depending on like bodily functions. They could do everything from like immune response, metabolism, growth, just about anything you can think of has a peptide that can modulate the process. So it's really cool. It's almost like you got this little army of soldiers that can go talk to cells and tell them what to do, and the cell then executes what you want it to.
I'm gonna take a shot at defining a peptide here. Let me
Uh
know
huh.
how far off I am. So a peptide is like an exogenous or a sequence of short chain amino acids, or a sequence of amino acids made up in a short chain of less than 45 bonds that
Uh huh.
tell they're like an external messenger that tell your cells to do something.
Yep, that's exactly right. And if you think about a peptide as a text message, a protein would be a textbook.
Right?
So, as we're talking about these things, just different size molecules kind of determine their classification. And then also, when we think about the size of them, so if we've got like a bioregulator peptide that's 2 to 4 amino acids long, or if we've got something that's like 50 amino acids long, or something that's 191 amino acids long, or even longer, um, when we think about how those are going to interact with the cell, basically, the smaller it is, it's almost like it can kind of sneak in there on the DNA and make epigenetic changes. Peptides typically, and that's what happens when you eat a protein and it gets broken apart into these essentially peptide chains. Those are going to interact more on the outside of the cell and more in terms of signaling. And then protein, like a macromolecule, that's just kind of the raw materials.
Got it.
So how like stable or unstable is a peptide, right? Because it seems like I mean a protein lasts in your body, a certain amount of time. Is a
Mhm.
peptide similar in that sense where you have a certain amount of time where you got to re up these peptides, or how does that work?
Yeah, that's a great question. The stability of the peptide, different ones are going to have different stability. And a lot of it's going to have to do with both the structure as well as like the size of the molecule. So if we think about something like um, a longer chain like growth hormone and 191 amino acids long and a fairly complex molecule, and we think about our digestive process and the acid it would be exposed to, it would get sort of broken and twisted, and shape could be changed. So that's why we can't take that orally. Conversely, if you look at something like a growth hormone releasing peptide or growth hormone releasing hormone, where it's a smaller chain of amino acids, um, there are some that are going to be small enough that would be stable and remain intact orally, and then do as we were talking about the signaling, where they're going to tell the pituitary to make more growth hormone and release growth hormone. So to answer your question, they the smaller they are, generally the more stable they're going to be. Um, the larger they are, a lot of times those are. It's not so much that they're less stable; it's just with kind of a longer chain of amino acids. There's more, I guess, bending maybe would be a good way to explain it. More bending that can occur and more changing of the structure. And since they send a signal, we want that structure to be intact so the correct signal is sent.
Gotcha. So what's the difference between a peptide and a steroid? Like,
Yeah, so the steroids, when you think about peptides and steroids, so there are some peptides that can be hormones. So like oxytocin's a good example of a peptide that's a hormone. Steroids, on the other hand, they're more of a type of lipid, fat with, and they have a four carbon ring structure. Um, so basically, the simple answer is like a steroid is going to be a lipid, and a peptide is going to be more of a protein structure. But both of them do signal and have some similarities.
So that's like the that's the simple answer is like, yeah, peptide, the protein, and steroids closer to the fat, or is it fat?
Yep. Yeah, exactly.
Very interesting. I did not know that. Um, so I want to get into kind of some of the applications of peptides. I don't have you ever thought about peptides in like classes or groups of effect? And if so, kind of what are those groups of effect?
Yeah, so when I think about peptides, really it's amazing. I mean, there's not something you could come up with that there wouldn't be a peptide that could address that. But generally speaking, when I break them down, I think about things like in one category, I would have like things for repair. In another category, I'd have things for brain health. In another category, I'd have things for sort of longevity, general health. Another category, like fat loss, and another category like growth hormone releasing peptides and secretagogues. And then there's a lot of crossover between those, but those are kind of how I generally would break those apart.
Awesome. So I think I missed one, but it's repair, brain health, fat loss, growth hormone releasing.
Uh-huh. And you could throw longevity in there too,
Oh,
things
I
like
see. Yeah.
and even kind of a broader umbrella with the longevity, you have things that regulate like circadian biology, so like your sleep wake cycle, sleep, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
so there's a wide range to use these peptides and everything, but I guess the question that I think would come next is like, what's the like what's the safety of this? Like how do we measure like correct ranges? How do you make sure that you're doing the positive benefits of this are outweighing any negative potential negatives, or what are the downsides of taking peptides?
So the really cool thing with peptides, good way to think about it. Imagine you've got this really nice stereo and goes up to 10, and parents are gone for the weekend. So it's like, man, we're going to crank that thing up to 10. And the speakers are really pounding. Um, and you can hook an amplifier up to it, whatever, but it's not going to go past 10. And peptides are kind of the same way. They are going to be designed to send a signal that's going to take you up to the optimal range of homeostasis, but they're not really going to take you into a super physiologic level. Like something like if you were taking exogenous testosterone, or if you were taking a polypeptide like insulin or growth hormone. So in terms of safety, really, um, there's, I'd say, to the best of my knowledge, I haven't come across any negative, like long-term side effects from them. I'm reluctant to say they're zero because research is continuing to evolve, but basically they're really safe. Uh, I tell people they're Anthony proof. Like no matter how what you put together, what you do, like you're not going to mess yourself up.
Yep. So I've had this question. Someone asked me this about the growth hormone, and I want to get into the kind of examples of each peptide
Uh huh.
within each category. But someone asked me about the growth hormone releasing peptides, if that like affects your pituitary gland's ability to produce growth hormone going forward, or does it just kind of reset back to normal once you get off?
It'll reset back to normal. In fact, even with exogenous growth hormone, some people talk about like receptor involution, which is basically where the receptor would no longer be responsive to the growth hormone. But in all the research that I've looked through, even when people are taking like a super physiologic amount of growth hormone, um, their hormone levels and production return to normal. The long-term potential side effects you could have with, like, if we're talking about exogenous growth hormone, because it can increase lipolysis and glycolysis, that can increase the sugars in the bloodstream, and you'd have to make sure that you're not creating a situation that could lead to diabetes down the road. But
Right.
generally speaking, to answer your question, completely safe, everything had returned to normal. Um, Not to get too far off the subject, but it's kind of interesting. When people think about growth hormone, we just kind of think about it in a general sense, like one growth hormone. But we actually have over 100 different isoforms of growth hormone that we produce in our body. There's a 22 kilodalton isoform, 19 kilodalton isoform, 20 kilodalton isoform, 21 kilodalton isoform. And all those have slightly different physiological effects. So when we talk about like growth hormone releasing hormones, those are going to be things that are going to stimulate the pituitary to release growth hormone. And while it primarily is going to increase like the 22 kilodalton isoform, um, it also releases some of the other isoforms. And that's one of the big differences that you're going to see between that and like an exogenous recombinant growth hormone, that these a combination of GHRH, GHRP is going to more closely mimic your natural pulsing of growth hormone, as well as broader range of isoforms. So it's going to be a little bit closer to what you normally produce. Um, and then within that, it's really cool. There's a whole bunch of different ones, but just to give you a couple of examples, like when people think about, I'm going to take a growth hormone releasing peptide, and how do I know which one to choose? So there's like, for instance, hexerelin would be one, and that primarily promotes the release of the 22 kilodalton form of growth hormone. Little bit of the 20 also, but what's really cool about that particular one is it's got phenomenal cardiovascular benefits, reduces inflammation in the heart. In fact, they're researching it right now is for that specific reason. And then you also get the growth hormone release with it. Or if you look at something like tesamorelin, tesamorelin was actually developed for AIDS patients. They have dyslipidemia, which is where you store fat in places that would just be weird, like on your arm or something like that. And with tesamorelin, it increases the lipolysis and can create like a localized fat burning effect, just like you get with a recombinant growth hormone.
That's actually
And
that's a tesamorelin's a prescription drug now for that, right?
uh-huh,
There's a
yeah,
the FDA approved prescription drug that is tesamorelin.
yep, yeah. The That's one of the FDA approved ones, and sermorelin's also FDA approved for um, children that don't produce enough growth hormone. The ipamorelin, the CJC, some of the other ones you might hear about, those kind of fall into a gray space. You can get them as like a research peptide, but and they were being compounded in the pharmacies, but right now, until more human research accumulates, the compounding pharmacies aren't allowed to make them.
Got it. That's actually one of the things we wanted to get into was the legality and stuff. But maybe let's first stay with kind of the different classifications while we're
Yeah.
on it. Ryan, you look like you have a burning question.
Well, sorry, this is a little not a little tangent, but like, so what does this look like? Like, let's say somebody came to you and was like, "Hey, I want to improve recovery, longevity, muscle growth, any kind of effects I can get." Do we know like if you start mixing and matching these things, is it one? I'm assuming it'd be really expensive, but let's say like throw costs out the window. Is this a safe thing to like start mixing and matching these? And then um I guess if that is true, or do we have enough knowledge to know, like, has anybody just been like, "Hey, let me take everything and see what happens?"
Yeah, so that's a great question. And I would say the short answer is yes, it is safe to mix these. In fact, most of the time when people come to me, that's what we do. We kind of build uh, anywhere from like a 4 week all the way up to a whole annual program. And when we kind of think about like the groundwork, like how do we put this together? Where do we start? So the first thing I consider when I look at things, unless of course it's an acute situation, like if somebody comes to me and they have an injury, then obviously we're going to address that right out of the gate. But we'll just say for general health purposes, and somebody just wants to, I call it optimize. So they want to have sharp brain, perform well in the gym, add years onto their life. They want the whole 9 yards. And with something like that, kind of the foundation, what we look at first is going to be what are they doing with their training? What are they doing with their lifestyle? And the reason I look at those two things first, in addition to like, sounds kind of weird, but what part of the country do they live in? And what's the seasonal biological considerations? So the reason we look at those things first, those are going to be the stresses that um, like when you think about our biology, so in the winter we produce more inflammatory cytokines and our insulin sensitivity is going to be lower. So if we were starting in the winter with your peptide protocol, hypothetical peptide protocol, we would want to address things that are primarily going to target inflammation, insulin sensitivity, and those sorts of things. Whereas if you were coming to me in the summer or the spring, and our body just kind of sees 3 seasons more than four. If you're coming to me in the summer or spring, what we would look at is, we've got optimal insulin sensitivity and more hours of sunlight. So this is going to be a good time to focus on things that are, in the spring that are going to clean out the old dead cells, and in the summer, things that are really going to optimize mitochondrial function so we can carry that momentum into the winter. And then with the training, if we're looking at like, we'll say kind of three broad categories. So metabolic training, um, if we're looking at hypertrophy training, or if we're looking at neural training. Um, if we think about metabolic training, we're really to kind of improve how we're performing in that. We want to look at things like mitochondrial function, things that are going to drive AMPK pathway, so kind of our ability to use energy, um, and things that are going to um, support how we're using energy. When we look at hypertrophy, it's kind of a mix. We want things that are going to improve mitochondrial function, but a big thing that people miss is immune system function, because that's what's going to support clearing out all that metabolic waste and recovering from the inflammation so that we can realize those gains a little bit faster. And then we also want things that are going to have an anabolic effect, things like an IGF-1 or pegylated MGF or oxytocin. MGF and the oxytocin increase proliferation of satellite cells. And then if we look at neural training, where essentially the gains that we make and how we do in the gym is going to be a reflection of our ability for things like rate coding and like the integrity of our cell membrane. We're going to want to look at neural peptides that are also going to have really good carryover for like brain function. So that's kind of a broad overview of kind of what we do. And then in terms of putting them together, usually I think about kind of a good starting point for if somebody's like, I just want to try some peptides out, general stuff. Uh, Kind of think about which peptides are going to cover the most ground. And when we look at things like that, like BPC, a lot of people call it the Swiss Army knife of peptides. And it does so many different things that it's one of those big bang for your buck peptides. So it's going to help with tissue healing and regeneration. It has anti-inflammatory effects. It increases nitric oxide. It heals the gut lining. It's got neuroprotective benefits. It increases the density of growth hormone receptors. So it's like, man, we could really cover a lot of ground with that. And then because growth hormone releasing peptides, again, do so many things. Those are going to help increase lean muscle mass, which will indirectly improve insulin sensitivity. And it's going to help with like repair of connective tissue and organs, as well as brain function and improve sleep. So that's usually kind of the second layer to that. And then when we think about, you know, really important to kind of everything we're looking at these days in terms of our health comes back to the mitochondria, whether we're talking about like macular degeneration or top end performance. So good mitochondrial peptide in there, something like MOTSC would be a great choice. And with just those four, and of course we can add more on. The next one I would add on would be something like one of the GLP-1s. You get the neuroprotective benefits.
Topic.
And oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was saying the GLP-1s are a hot topic, but keep going. I do want to get into that.
Sure. Yeah. So the GLP-1s, with those, it's amazing the ground you can cover with those. So we know about their benefits for reducing appetite and improving uh, signaling for insulin release. But what a lot of people don't know, they have tremendous anti-inflammatory benefits. So in terms of like if you have inflammation in a joint, they can help with that. And for addictive behavior, specifically semaglutide, there's a research done in Singapore where they looked at its effect on the GLP-1 receptors in the brain and uh, s- some of the neurons around it, and how it got people to not quit drinking, but essentially kind of be more responsible with the amount of alcohol they were drinking and lose their desire to drink um, in situations where it was, almost like a nervous thing or like a, hey, I'm just going to have a drink type of thing. And they're cardioprotective as well as neuroprotective. In fact, um, they were originally like when they started studying these GLP-1s, they were studying them for their neuroprotective benefits. And when they started looking through the data, they found like these people are losing weight and their sugars are better. And it didn't take too long to figure out like, wow, diabetes and weight loss is a much bigger market than preventative neurology. So they kind of changed gears. They went over, they got them pushed through for that. And now you notice they've gone back and they're approved for cardioprotective benefits as well as staving off neurodegeneration. So, and you'll see that a lot with a drug. It'll get pushed through for kind of like the easiest thing to push it through for, but it can be repurposed for so many other things.
So when you say cardioprotective or neuroprotective, like
Uh-huh.
can you define that a little bit? Like what does this actually do to be cardioprotective or neuroprotective, and
Sure.
what do you mean by that?
I
Yeah.
also, real quick, Anthony, I wanted to define for our audience that GLP-1s are, semaglutide, or widely known as Ozempic.
Uh-huh. Yeah. So like Wegovy, Ozempic, Zepbound, there and let's see, to answer the question in terms of like neuroprotection and cardioprotection. So when we think about, uh, when they look at Alzheimer's, a lot of times you hear about like the amyloid plaques and those kind of things forming. And for a long time, people are even looking at Alzheimer's as being like a type 3 diabetes. And uh, a lot of what they were finding is this was a process that was driven by rapid like rise and fall of blood sugars. So by controlling the release of these sugars and maintaining good fasting glucose, it prevents that from happening. So those plaques don't really form. another really cool thing, and I don't want to get too far off the subject here. They've discovered these plaques might actually not be the target. That if you can think about the plaque as like these little strings of spaghetti, and there's what's called galectin 3, and it kind of holds these together, and it looks like one of those like spiky sponge ball things, just grabs all these spaghetti things, and it kind of bounces around, and then it gets stuck in the synapse, which is like where the nerves would connect. And when the nerve can't connect, there's no signal and affects the memory. So they've been looking into they've come out with some monoclonal antibodies that are galectin 3 inhibitors, and these things are amazing. I mean, everything from reducing fibrosis to literally like turning Alzheimer's around. I watched a patient video where this guy was sitting on the couch with his daughter and couldn't remember her name. And once a month treatment with this TB006. Um, 6 months later, he was allowed to drive short distances, remembered his daughter's name, and it's like, wow, this is amazing. It's just from clearing out that galectin 3. Um, and then with the cardioprotective benefits, when we think about like, people are always like sugar's inflammatory if we eat sugar. And that's one of those things where when we eat sugar and our sugars rise, that creates inflammation, and then that inflammation creates inflammation in the heart. Um, One of the things that GLP-1s do by regulating the sugar is it reduces overall inflammation, so that transfers over to the cardiovascular benefits and the cardioprotective benefits.
Got it.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So I mean, it's super effective at regulating blood sugar, which then has a lot of downstream positive effects.
Yep, exactly.
I want to, because we could have a podcast on each subcategory peptides. So I just want to quickly run through kind of the ones you went through, and then maybe
Yeah,
have about a couple of your favorites in each. So we
sure.
did growth hormone, secretagogues. You mentioned tesamorelin and hexarelin. Any other honorable mentions in there?
Yeah, so for the growth hormone releasing hormone, growth hormone releasing peptides, um, the ones that people are generally going to focus on are going to be like the sermorelin, the CJC 1295, and they have with DAC and without DAC. DAC stands for Drug Affinity Complex, and generally, like I think it's a better move if you're going to use that one to use without DAC. The reason the one with DAC, that's a really, really long half life. And people are like, well, this is great. I only have to do one shot a week. But, if you're a little bit off on your timing, that can kind of throw off your natural pulsation of growth hormone. You have a little bit more control and precision with the no DAC version. Um,
Got
and
it.
then there's the GHRP2, GHRP6, um, and those are going to be ghrelin agonists. So when we think about that type of a growth hormone releaser, those are working through the ghrelin pathway, so those can stimulate a little bit more appetite. So if somebody's like dieting for something, like if you guys were getting ready for wrestling and you were going to use GHRH, GHRP, that would probably not be one that you'd want to want to use, and you'd have a tough time passing up the food.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. Okay. So then there's repair. I know you mentioned BPC.
Uh-huh.
I,
Yeah,
I always hear BPC 157. What's all the rave with BPC 157?
yeah, it's a 15 amino acid sequence, and it does some really cool things. It increases, it's called VEGF, vascular endothelial growth factor. And what that does is it increases vascularization to an area. So when you think about, like, let's say you rupture a tendon, one of the challenges is going to be getting blood supply over there. And you want to have a two-way highway. You want to be able to get after the initial inflammation process, you want to be able to remove that stuff. And then you want to be able to get the growth factors in. So when you have better vascularization to the area, you're going to see some benefit there. And then some other things it does is um, it with the regulation of nitric oxide, that's going to help with like blood vessel dilation, and that's important like for everything from like your brain to general circulation. and it decreases some of the inflammatory pathways, and it reduces oxidative stress. So it's just really and repairs like digestive lining. And you guys have probably heard like a lot of people tell you, your health starts in your gut. That's your foundation. And no matter what, if you don't have a good gut, like whether it's performance, better brain, longer life, it's just not going to go in your favor. So yeah, BPC just covers so many bases that, and the nice thing about it too is because it naturally occurs in our gastric digestive juices, it's something you can take orally. So I talk about barrier of entry. A lot of people, even though it's just little insulin needle, a lot of people, if they hear they're going to give themselves a shot, they're like, "Oh, this doesn't sound good at all." But if you tell them, "Hey, just take this capsule twice a day," um, they're like, "Okay, I can do that. It's not terrible."
Yeah.
So lower barrier of entry.
Yeah, absolutely. And then there's like the frequency too, right? Because that's like BPC is like a daily thing. So if you're going to be doing an injection, you have to do it daily, which a
Yeah.
lot of people just are not willing to do daily injections.
Yeah, BPC has a relatively short half-life, so yeah, you'd have to do that daily. And yeah, exactly to your point, tell somebody they got to give themselves a shot every day, and a lot of people are going to tap out.
Yep.
So you kind of mentioned it earlier that some things you can inject, some things you can take orally. How many
Uh-huh.
peptides do you inject versus orally? Is it like, is there any other way to get, is there any creams? Is there like, how do you
Nasal
generally take peptide?
Yeah, so the what's really cool is I mean there's a ton of different ways you can take these, and they're continuing to a lot of these are now finding way to put them in like a lipotab, which is a liposomal tablet. So most of these, basically any of them, any of the peptides you can inject, and then you can do like intranasal, and you can do like topical, you can do oral. They even have suppositories, like for probably
Max's favorite.
TMI, but
I was
yeah.
gonna make that joke, Brian. Not about you. I was gonna get you first. I decided to be mature, Ryan.
You're better than me, Max.
They, and they even have like eye drops for like if people have like dry eye, you can do like thymosin beta 4 eye drops. So really, when you think about like what's going to be the best delivery form, easy way to think about it is imagine you got a car full of workers, and we'll call that the peptide. And imagine like you have a shoulder injury. So if that car full of workers, and it's we'll call it BPC. So BPC, you can do any of those delivery methods with. If you take it orally, and that car full of workers is driving around the stomach, and they see like a little speed bump here and there, workers jump out. By the time you get to the shoulder, there's only one worker. But if you inject it in the shoulder where the injury's at, then you got a whole car full of workers, so it's just going to be more effective. And that concept's what we would call like the pharmacokinetics. So essentially, like how do we get the most of this to where we want it to be? And with some peptides, we have the challenge of like brain peptides. We have the blood-brain barrier, and it doesn't like to let a lot of things through. So there's if we do a nasal spray, it's closer to the brain, so we got that car full of workers going up there, but then it's also got to be in a medium that's going to be able to pass through that blood-brain barrier. So um, a lot of like when it comes down to which peptide's going to be what, there's going to be two considerations. Sort of what are you trying to address with it, and the pharmacokinetics of that, and then is it going to be uh, I guess available if you're trying to address something neurological, but it's something that won't cross that blood-brain barrier, then you'd have to take it, like orally or
Yep.
sub-Q.
So would you say it's fair to say, like, if you have an injury, you're probably gonna have to be, like, site specific, and if it's just general health stuff, it's a lot easier to take, like, an oral pill?
Yeah, I think if you have an injury, you're generally going to be site specific, and if like all things being equal, most of the time your best bet's going to be like a sub Q injection. The peptides I would take intranasally would be like Selenc or Cmax, and those are things that are going to affect the brain. And things that I would take orally, like the BPC. if I was taking that orally versus inject, I would just do a higher dose. So you got more workers in the car, so it'll still get to the shoulder. And then you also have the benefit of repairing the digestive
Yeah.
lining.
Okay.
Heard awesome things. Okay, so a couple other I want to cover real quick because
Hmm.
they're common. You hear about them. One is TB 500. That's
Uh-huh.
often taken with BPC, correct?
Yeah. So the TB500, it's so TB500 and thymosin beta 4 are basically the same thing. It's an 43 amino acid peptide, and it's helps with cell migration. So when we talk about like healing, and we want to get like a lot of cells over there to kind of repair that, it's going to be good for that. It reduces inflammation. It's a peptide that's naturally made by the thymus gland, so it regulates immune function, um, and it encourages angiogenesis, so it helps get new blood vessels, that sort of thing. Um, it encourages stem cells to differentiate, which is like if you get a really bad injury and like you're going in and doing stem cells, if you load up on the TB4 ahead of time, and then maybe continue that, as you're like about a week afterwards, you're going to get a lot more out of those stem cells. And then it also interacts with actin. It binds to actin, um, which helps in terms of kind of repairing those actin filaments. And it reduces a lot of the pro-inflammatory cytokines, um, and particularly like for tendons, it's really good for tendinous type of injuries. And then um, a couple of lesser known benefits for it or applications. If somebody has like an ischemic event, like a heart attack, you can take like a really high dose of TB4 almost immediately. And there have been cases where people have done this and they show no signs of ischemic damage. And then
Wow.
for ocular health, like dry eye is a pretty common thing. And you can have TB4 eye drops compounded, um, and that'll help with dry eyes.
Fascinating. So the one we really haven't we talked. You quickly mentioned a couple of the neural peptides, which were Cmax and Selenk.
Uh huh.
Can you give a quick overview on those, and then maybe a couple of the anti-aging as well? And I think we've kind of covered. A good-
Sure. Yeah. So the Selenk is awesome. That is one of my favorite peptides. It is well, I've never met a peptide I didn't like, but Selenic in particular, what it does is it modulates GABA. So when we think about like a lot of people take benzodiazepines to help with anxiety or to sleep, and the difference when you take something like a Selenk, if your GABA is too low, it's going to raise it up, or if it's too high, like getting kind of sleepy and dopey, it'll actually lower it. So it modulates GABA. It also has benefits for your immune system, and it increases BDNF. So in terms of like uh, helping create new neural connections and improving memory, neuroplasticity, really good for that. Um, and then the Cmax, the short answer would be Cmax would be more of a um, modulates, helps with BDNF and helps to modulate um, more of your excitatory kind of get up and go type of neurology. Um, a lot of people use them together. There's no really wrong way to do those. I don't have as much experience with the Cmax. Like for me personally, there are other neural peptides that I prefer over that. So really big on cerebrolysine or dihexa. Those are two of my favorites. And then new not really a peptide, but that would be another one that I'd go for over the Cmax. Um, and then the Selenk, I do that at the beginning of cold and flu season to strengthen the immune system. If I'm having trouble sleeping, like I'll take that an hour before I go to sleep. If accidentally drank too much coffee, you take it during the day, and it's not going to make you tired. It's just going to kind of take that like anxiousness off. So just a really useful peptide to have.
I accidentally drink too much coffee a lot.
Me too.
Every day.
Accidentally on purpose. Yeah.
That's
Um,
funny.
Last question, because before we kind of get into the legality and
Uh-huh.
that kind of thing, is because I think a common mistake with peptides is these things take a little bit to work, right? Like especially some of the like repair recovery ones. That these aren't like 2 weeks and you're seeing full effects. Can you talk a little bit about how long it takes to really start to see positive effects, and if there's any common mistakes around that?
Yeah. So in terms of the time it takes for them to work, um, it's kind of interesting. Like they start working like literally immediately, and they have a really short half life. So they it's like boom right out of the gate. But a lot of people aren't going to notice those benefits for a while. So a lot of like how long does it take to notice? Um, it kind of depends peptide to peptide and on the issue. So if we're talking about something like injury, um, and it's probably gonna, uh, I guess probably the easiest way to explain it, frame of reference, I'll use myself for an example. So the first injury I had, I tore my hamstring and I was out for it. Luckily, I tore it in the belly. It wasn't at the tendon. I was out for about 8 weeks, and
How'd you tear?
even I was being a dumbass, lack of a better way to put it. I came
Okay.
in middle of the winter. I came right in. I was in a hurry and went right over to stiff leg deadlifts, 315, and rep number two. And I was like,
Oh,
just that big pop. It was like I got shot in the back of the leg. I didn't know what it was, and I was like, oh man. But then, I figured it out, and that was like before I really had access to this stuff. So about 8 weeks, for me to get back to where I was even feeling comfortable getting under the bar. Now, conversely, and granted, it's a different muscle group. Pec tear, right in the pec, belly of the pec. I was back to full range of motion in 2 weeks. I was back to 85% of my strength in 4 weeks, and now I'm ahead of where I was before the tear, and I'm 51. So uh, I would say it's not so much that like day one you're going to feel it. It's more like by week four you're where you would be at week eight if you didn't have those in the picture.
Right.
There's because with them being a signaling molecule, it's like there's so many signals going on, so many little behind the scenes things happening that we don't really notice those until it's like it's almost that like you wake up one day and everything's fixed, but there's so much that went into it before that.
Right. And correct me if I'm wrong, but because like you were talking about the speaker, you're turning it up to 10, you're
Yep.
not getting super physiologic. So you're not going to notice these like crazy changes in your body or physiology like you would if you were taking an anabolic steroid or something like that. It's just, it's more you're just optimizing things along the way.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And the other thing to consider too, especially in the context of an injury, is the actual tissue. It's debatable, like how much strength we lose or whatever. But as far as like reinnervating the nervous system and redeveloping those neural connections, and then, um, for lack of a better way to put it, kind of mentally getting over that hurdle, like, all right, I'm not going to injure myself if I go do this. I think those are the things that kind of impede the progress. To use another personal example, my fiance tore her aponeurosis in her calf, and it it's it's painful, and definitely don't want to do that again. So it just took a long time mentally to get to that point where like, okay, I can put some weight on this and walk on here, and still kind of working through that. And that's common. I see that with people a lot. But in terms of like, if we were to X-ray, or not X-ray, but MRI, like the actual tissue, which you'd probably see in like 5 to 10 days, is that like the scarring had occurred and the tissue had uh, healed up. And but as far as like regaining the function of the tissue and kind of getting over that mental hurdle, like that takes people a lot longer in general.
just real quick here. Can we dig into that a little bit more with
Uh-huh.
like, I mean, obviously, nothing's like a catch all fix all. It's not a steroid where you're gonna feel it as much. But I mean, I'm thinking about like in a range of like creatine to steroid. Would you put it like how much do you anecdotally, or you've seen a lot of people do this? Like how much do you
Jeez.
act? Well, I'm just saying, like, how much
I
how
get
much
what
do you
you're
actually
saying.
feel it?
Yeah.
Because everyone talks about creatine, and you're like, it's one of the most studied things. It's obviously
Yeah.
beneficial, but you take it, and you're like, okay, maybe it's 0.5% better, and it's like, I know it's good for me, but I think that's why I take it more so than I actually recognize the effects until,
Yeah.
like, maybe 1 extra rep in your workout. How much do you actually feel like your day to day that you actually notice the difference here, or do you? Or do you think that's like a, "Hey, I mentally know I'm taking something, so I think I'm feeling better about it."
That's a really good question. I can speak from my perspective. Like, there are some peptides when I take like 100%, I notice. Um, a good example, like I don't know, and this is kind of ironic being a strength coach. I don't know too many people that hate cardio more than I do. I'll tell other people to do it, but you're not going to see me out there. And when I do the mitochondrial peptides, like I had my VO2 max checked and lung function and everything, and I'm not a guy that like I feel like I gas out pretty fast. But with the mitochondrial peptides, he's like, "Man, you got amazing lung function. Like you must do a lot of cardio." I'm like, "Yep, you called me out." So some of those, it's like you'll really notice. And then another good example would be like an IGF long R3, and that's more for like hypertrophy type of stuff. But you put on some pretty significant size and lean out pretty fast with that, or like a tesamorelin, like you'll notice within 5 days, like you're getting leaner. Now, and like a Solank, another one, like within 15 minutes of like nasal spray, you'll feel focused, calm. Um, but there are other ones, like good example, and it's actually a mitochondrial peptide SS31. um, I had some acute kidney issues due to anemia and took a high dose of SS31. And like I felt tired all the time because of the anemia. But like my kidney repair, it was like exponentially getting better every month. So I didn't really feel it until we saw it on the blood work. So it kind of depends on the peptide and issue in terms of like what you're going to feel.
Yeah, that makes a
Yeah.
lot of sense.
But they're not like it's not like taking an anabolic steroid. It's not just like
No, it's
yeah.
yeah, with steroids, it's like take those day one, it's like feel all swollen up, and I'm like, yeah, maybe I could tap into that pro bodybuilding career. Not a chance, but yeah, not like that.
So that's a good into legality because I think it's worth mentioning. I mean, if you're a USADA or WADA tested athlete, these are banned,
Uh-huh.
not allowed. Um, Good for us to mention that because a lot of our
Yeah.
listeners or in in wrestling and college wrestling, it's kind of that's high school wrestling. You're drug tested, so these would not be allowed. But outside of that, like in drug tested athletics, what like in the for the general population, what is the legality of these things? I remember you explained to me the difference in like purity between compounding pharmacies, um, FDA approved drugs, and then the research chems. I was actually really surprised by kind of your breakdown on that. So maybe get into that a little bit as well.
Yeah, it's really interesting. So when we talk about the legality of these, I work with a lot of pro athletes as well as younger athletes, and technically, they're banned in the sport, but there's 7,000 peptides out there, and like the list doesn't have them all on there. So it's almost like this process of trying to stay ahead of what's made the list. With that being said, outside of sports, like the legality of them. So I think it was last September, right around then, FDA put 10 of the most common peptides on Schedule 2, and they were things like BPC 157, um, ipamorelin, CJC, things that people were commonly using. I think epitalin's on there, um, and the reason they put them on there was because there was not enough human data to support that they were safe or whatever. And I don't know the full story behind it, but my understanding is one of the pharmacies was like, "Hey, these are safe," kind of poked the bear, so to speak, and the FDA was like, "Whoa, now that we looked at this, we got to take a closer look." So they put them on there, and it's really funny. So BPC, that's on that list, it's they can make it into a capsule, and you can buy it at the like from a compounding pharmacy as a capsule, or like a lipo tab, like the no problem at all, not illegal. Um, But if they were to compound it into an injectable, they're not allowed to do that. And then you see all these research chemical sites, and of course they have that disclaimer on there, not for human use. But all these, 200, 300 pound rats end up buying their peptides there, and it's that's also they're not really regulating that too much. Um, and then to kind of so to kind of give you the difference, different. We've got compounding pharmacy, we have the regular pharmacy, we have like research peptide places. And when you think about well, what are the differences between these? So if we go to and a good example to make this make a little bit more sense, when we think about like Ozempic or Wegovy, so like the GLP-1s, which as a peptide would be called semaglutide. If you get the prescription Ozempic, Wegovy, the purity on there is going to be like 90%. So it's you're getting what's there, and no chance that it's not going to be. Um, when we talk about like a compounding pharmacy, um, pretty good chance, especially with a reputable compounding pharmacy, it's going to be what's it's supposed to be. There's they have like manufacturing uh, processes that they ensure in place, and the sterility of the facility is inspected. But the problem is they only do that once a year, and the minimum those have to be at is 80%. So let's say you're a small compound pharmacy and you just spent all this money on raw material for semaglutide, and you know it's got to be at 80%. 80%'s the cutoff, and it's like, I'm pretty close. Actually, I'm sorry, it's 90% is the cutoff, and 95% for prescription. Um, so you're at 90%, and you're like, maybe I'll do 85%. And doesn't sound like a lot, but let's say you got 100 vials, and each one had 10 milligrams in there, and you're shorting 5 milligrams per vial. That really adds up. And if you're only going to get audited, once a year, maybe if that, um, odds are in your favor that you're going to be able to recoup some of that money, and then, hopefully get back on track to good manufacturing processes. And then with the research peptide places, those kind of run the gambit. You got some that are like probably some guy made it in his bathtub and got the, the supplies from Amazon. And then you have stuff that's really pretty solid, where they do like third party testing on it, just like regular pharmaceutical would, or like a compounding pharmacy would. So they're ensuring things are in place. So the challenge is, how do you navigate this? Um, for me, there's a couple companies that I know do third party testing, and um, really pretty solid in terms of their product and their ethics. Limitless Life Nootropics is really good. Cosmic Nootropic is really good. Amino Asylum. Um, these are places where they really take the extra steps to ensure that it's a pure product, it's a good product, the people have ethics. There's some other good companies out there. I just can only speak to the ones that I've had experience with. And then with the compounding pharmacies, it's you're probably going to be okay with the compounding pharmacies, but my recommendation would be if you're going that route, you probably like a big pharmacy like a Pharmakeo or Create or New BioAge pharmacies like that. Those are going to be pretty solid. Not to say other ones aren't, but you want to pick ones that are the more money they have behind the product. Generally, the more they stand to lose, so the more diligent they're going to be about testing.
Yep. Yep. That's it's super interesting. And it's that is helpful information to anyone who's just trying to navigate that. I think that kind of covered what I want to cover on safety and legality. Do you have any other
Yeah.
questions, Ryan?
No, I guess one last thing, I guess, which I'm curious about is if it doesn't bring you above your natural ability with your going back to your speaker analogy, if you can only go to a
Uh-huh.
10, it might bring you to a 10 if you're at a 7, but you're not going to go to an 11. What how do you test for something like this? How do you test, like, levels of stuff? Because it seems like it's more of an upstream peptides are more upstream, and then it kinda, like, optimizes your downstream stuff, which helps you. So and maybe I'm wrong with that, I don't know. Is that
No, that's definitely accurate. In terms of the tests, it kind of depends on which peptide and what tests you're going to do. But like, for example, like there's Genova Labs does, it's called the NutriVal, and it looks at everything from like micronutrient deficiencies to neurotransmitters to organic acids, mitochondrial health, broad range of stuff. And with a test like that, you can really see, like, if I'm taking a mitochondrial peptide, and this is where I started at, and this is where I'm at now. Like, you have a objective way to gauge it. What I actually started doing, and this is my new business, I'm really excited about this. You guys are familiar with like VO2 max testing?
Hmm.
So it's super cool with breath analysis. You can accurately, 95% accurately gauge 23 biomarkers. You can look at what type of fuel you're burning. So are you burning fats or are you burning carbohydrates? And from
wow.
that, you can look and see like how well is somebody's mitochondria working. So like if somebody's burning fat, and then for a while, and then they start to burn glucose versus if they burn fat and then they right away burn glucose, that's going to tell you there's not much. The second example is a good indication there's not much metabolic flexibility, and that would be coming from the health of the mitochondria. So, um,
That's cool.
basically, what I do is I use it's called the PNOE, and I do a breath analysis for people, and then I do with the InBody 970, which is their newest model. It's a electrical impedance, but I'm such a nerd. I actually tested it out against a DEXA. It was within 0.8%. Um,
Wow.
and what's really cool about the reason I like the InBody better than the DEXA when I was kind of deciding what I wanted to go with, um, the InBody, you're not exposed to radiation. DEXA, you're going to be exposed to radiation, so you really shouldn't test more than once about every 12 weeks. Um, Also with the InBody, the 970 uses 8 different uh, electrical impedance wavelengths. So it's going to be a lot more accurate than like, the handheld or like there's based on the number of wavelengths that's going to affect how accurate it is. InBody also looks at like your hydration level. So you're comparing apples to apples. A good example would be like, let's say you went in there today, you test your body fat, you come out at 10%, and then you go in tomorrow and you drink a whole bunch of water, and that water is going to get classified essentially as mass. So that could skew the reading, but your body fat percentage um, technically would go down because your that fat is a lower percentage of the total weight, but you didn't actually lose fat mass. So it does segmental analysis, and then it also does something that's called phase angle, and that looks at the integrity of your cell membrane as well as nutrient absorption. So if I know somebody's nutrient absorption, and I've got those 23 biomarkers, and I can assess mitochondrial health, I can assess VO2 max, I can assess the type of fuel they're burning. Then I can pretty objectively gauge, how effective are these peptides, which peptides should we be using, and I can be really precise with my recommendations.
Wow.
That's really cool. So you're kind of taking the prescription of it to the next level beyond just qualitative data.
Yeah, I think with one of the challenges you run into with blood work as a way to evaluate these, and I'm all for getting blood work done, but thing to remember with blood work is it's like a photograph, and it's a photograph at that very moment. So, for instance, we all train. You guys probably train a lot harder than me, especially in the cardio department. And if you have a really tough workout the day before you do blood work, that can elevate your liver enzymes, and it can skew a lot of things on there. Or if you don't sleep the night before
Right.
there's lots of things that can just kind of acutely affect the blood work. And it's not practical to go get blood work done, every 4 weeks. Because what you want to do on blood work is really you're looking at a trend. And when you can spot those trends, that gives some utility to the blood work, and you can start to make some good assessments. With like a breath analysis, you can do that. I mean, you can do that every 2 weeks if you want. I usually do like every 4 to 6 weeks for people, and that lets us really stay on top of things. Like what type of training do we need to be working on? How are they using fuel? Is it time to rotate the nutrition supplements, peptides, the stuff we're using, so we can really um, and if they come in and they're like, I didn't sleep well the night before, we can test them the very next day, and we can be like, all right, this is probably more what we were expecting, whereas you couldn't really do that with blood work.
That's fascinating. These are all the reasons to work with Anthony if you're going to do this stuff. So I think that's a good way to wrap, Anthony. And I want to thank you for your time. And where can people find you? What's the best way for them to reach out?
Yeah, thanks again for having me on. Really appreciate it. Love talking to you guys, and I can nerd out on this stuff forever.
Nice.
If you guys want to get a hold of me, easiest thing to do is I'm on Instagram pretty regularly. I do different 30-day series. The one I'm currently doing is on biometrics. I've done one on cellular pathways, nutrition supplements, um, and I do different live feeds on there. Going to be doing a webinar series. And if you DM me or you want to email me at acastore@gmail.com, I can put you on the list for it. This webinar series, I'm going to be introducing the 20 most exciting compounds nobody's actually using yet. They're not on any banned list, and these are game changers. I mean, we're talking about things that can be used from anything from cancer to leaning out within 10 days if you got a beach vacation coming up, to putting on a significant amount of muscle. So really exciting stuff. But yeah, I'm on Instagram regularly. You can reach out through email. And the company I'm starting, it's called Drive Longevity Solutions. And basically what I'm going to be doing with that, the biometric assessments, like what I talked about, there's a doctor that I partnered with, and we're able to do telemed. So if you guys are interested in doing like a peptide protocol and that sort of thing, the doctor and I work as a team. We can get you set up on a really effective program. You've got doctor overseeing everything. And if you're in the area or you want to come to the area, we can do those biometric assessments on you. We've got other options if you're farther away, but uh, Drive Longevity Solutions is the company. And yeah, anything I can do to help you guys out. I love doing this stuff, and appreciate you guys having me on here.
Thanks, Anthony. One quick thing. What was your Instagram handle? I don't know if you mentioned that or
Sure.
might have
Yeah.
missed it.
Instagram is just at Anthony and then Castore at Anthony Castore.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, thank you, man, for coming on. We definitely enjoyed this, and we'll need to get you back on. I think there's like this made me have even more questions. So I appreciate your knowledge and your time today.
Love
Thank
to.
you.
Yeah. Anytime. Have a great night, guys.
See ya.
You too.
Yep.
Bye.
See ya.